So the purpose of this video is just to run through, a couple of tips and tricks, for solving relatively simple but very annoying problems that can pop up in ArcGIS. Everything from data management to tools crashing to, if you're stuck and geoprocessing isn't working. The videos elsewhere on the YouTube channel are really good for diving very deeply into specific tools and processes. But consider these just general, all-purpose tips for when you're stuck in ArcGIS. And if this is a good video, I'll keep doing addition to these and trying to grow them over time. But these are starting with about 8 tips and tricks that I think are really helpful and can save you a lot of time in ArcGIS. So the tip and trick here is really in those instances when you're trying to run a tool in ArcGIS, any number of tools that you might run from up here, and you don't really see anything happen, and then maybe you see like a tiny box come up from down here, and it tells you there's an error. No matter how many times you run it, it still causes that same error. That's at the best. At worst, sometimes the program itself just crashes. So really the issue here is around background geoprocessing. You can look online if you want to learn a little bit more about, kind of the science around why this issue occurs, 32 versus 64-bit processing. But for now, let me just say a good tip in practice is to always have it off. So just to give you an example right here, I'm going to run a tool. I don't know if it is going to crash it because it doesn't do it all the time, but sometimes it does and it's frustrating. Just pretend I was going to interpolate home sale prices here. I'm not really going to pay attention to any of the details, really. See, nothing happens. It says it's running, right? It always says it's running away from the screen, and then you get something that pops up. Now, in this instance, it worked, but more often than not, what you'll see with background geoprocessing is this either comes up as an X or your computer crashes. And so what you can do, and I would highly recommend, is you go to geoprocessing options, and turn this off. It is a key element. Turn that off. I'm sure there are benefits to having it run. Theoretically, it allows you to run tools, and you can continue editing and doing other processes. But for the type of GIS processing you're probably going to do, you don't need to be doing all of that. So, why not save yourself the hassle and just make sure it's turned off? Same thing now. If I try to run it again. Now I have the tool in front of me, it tells me it's doing its thing, so on and so forth. Right, so that's the big difference. I really prefer having a toolbox pop up that tells me exactly what's going on, and as I said before, it limits errors. So this tip's really about table processing in ArcGIS, and about kind of getting them in there. This is really meant for those instances in which you bring a CSV, a comma-separated value, into ArcGIS, and it looks really weird, or it just won't seem to go in, or it like freezes ArcGIS desktop while you're trying to load it. This problem is primarily Mac-based. I'm not as sure of this problem on the Windows side, so this would be for people using Parallels, but there may be some applicability to people just using Windows. A lot of this takes itself from the legacy fact that ArcGIS uses DBF files. That's just kind of where it's most comfortable processing. But a lot of data these days is more easily accessible or stored in the CSV format because it's very simple, it's very clean, and you can store a lot. So it's a format you're going to download a lot and you're going to use, especially if you're converting from Excel. So I have 2 CSV files here, 2 comma-separated values, and one's regular and one I say Windows. So if you're working on a Mac, right, and you're in Excel, so let's just save this real quick as a workbook. And maybe you have data like this that you want to load. Well, there's a tool that allows you to do convert from Excel to CSV or to a table, but sometimes it doesn't really work. And so, one of the best ways to go about table conversions is if you save as, and then you're going to pick your format. And typically what someone would do is they see this, comma separated value, it's right there for me, it's waiting, I'll save it as a comma separated value and it'll all be well. So that's what I did here with regular CSV. And when I bring regular CSV in, I'm not sure why this happens, but this just tends to be what occurs when you save something as a regular CSV. I'm sure there are smarter minds out there that know the mechanics of why. I just know that it's annoying and we want to have a better way, right? We want something to look like this, right? We want our 3 fields and then our records demarcated as such. Sometimes if you have a massive data set, right, purchasing transactions or a huge real estate portfolio, or address data, this came in really easily because it only took 4 fields, right, or 4 records and transposed them horizontally. But you can imagine if this were like 100,000, it would just freeze. And if you let it stay long enough, it would eventually come in, but then your result would look like this. So really what you want is you want a Windows-based CSV. So when you're saving as from Excel, you want to go in and you want to come down to where it says Windows comma separated value, right there. So again, I don't know how applicable this is for people using Excel on a Microsoft or like a Windows operating machine. But if you're using Parallels and you're using your Excel on your Mac side, you definitely need to do this. So Windows comma separated, I would hit save, and if I drag it in, it would look like that. And I can open that one, Windows, and boom, that gives me what I want to see. So this issue is you've got a table that you drag into ArcGIS, sticking with that table theme. It's likely a CSV, and when you go to the attribute table and maybe you want to do some edits or you want to add a field, you find that that is grayed out, right? And so maybe you wanted to grow this before you joined it to something and you can't. Really the issue here is just that ArcGIS doesn't do well with CSVs. They're okay if all you want to do is join it, to something else, right? I could come up here and join based on a name field that I created, and that's perfectly fine. But again, if you're going to be just processing the table, with Field Calculator or Python or adding fields, you don't really want it to be a CSV. And you can always tell something's a CSV right there. It says CSV and it looks like this in Windows, in Catalog. So the best way to go about it, right-click, data, export it. And when you have the option to export it as something, choose debase table. This is just ArcGIS' best form. It's what ArcGIS is happiest using. It's just the easiest to work with. I'd highly recommend you kind of just build that into your methodology when you're working with tables. Always try to convert them. Now it's very easy to add a field if I wanted, and there it is. It kind of looks like a little green table versus the piece of paper, which is a CSV. So this tip's around XY coordinates, and in particular, a quick fix for those instances in which your XY points are not plotting where you think they should be. XY coordinates by far the best way to display point data. Really easy to do. You don't have to build anything, and it gives you about as exact a location as possible. Just to give you a little context for what we're about to dive into here. Remember that whenever you're working in ArcGIS, all of your layers, they can have their own coordinate systems, projected and geographic. But the data frame itself, right, the universe within which all of your layers live, that also has its own coordinate system. It is essentially primed with whatever you bring in first. Right, so the first thing I brought into here was something that had the Pennsylvania, South Pennsylvania state plane projected coordinate system, and so that's what the data frame is looking at. So essentially it takes your universe and models it in such a way that it prioritizes direction, distance, units, measurement, angle, so on and so forth for southeast Pennsylvania. So if I zoomed out to try to look at Seattle, right, or China or Australia, it would just look ridiculous because the world is almost being laid flat only for this region. But it's perfect if you want to model this region. The other thing, that you'll notice when you look at your properties is that there's units associated with this, right? There's a linear unit of foot that's associated with this coordinate system, which means that when you do any kind of tool or measurement that looks at the data frame's coordinate system, it's going to want to be looking in feet. And the reason I say that is if I go here to list by source where you can see your tables, right, I brought in a table that has famous artists that were either born or met in Philadelphia, and then an XY coordinate generally of where that occurred. Right, so anytime you see an XY coordinate, it's great. You can plot it. So if I right-click it, find it right there, display XY data. I think the big challenge here is that we all expect that, ArcGIS or Illustrator or any software, 100% has our back. And as much as they try to, they don't, always. Or even if they are trying to have our back, they're missing some small detail. And that's really what's happening here. Right? We see this and we go, ArcGIS knows what I want, and so we hit OK, and nothing shows up. And if I right-click and I zoom to them, they're in some strange location. I'm not even sure where we kind of are right here. I could bring in a base map, but it would slow down my computer. But I'm totally zoomed in. I can see my map scale is extremely small. But I wanted them to be here, right? I wanted them to be spread throughout Philadelphia. And so the issue here really is this. Now, what this does here is it will take on whatever the coordinate system of your data frame is. And we think that that's correct, right? It seems like what it's telling us is I will plot the XY coordinate, and then I will put it in the projected coordinate system that you're using, and that's fantastic. But that's not actually what it's asking you. What it's saying is, hey, you gave me a table, and I need you to tell me what units these are in, right? Because when you display coordinates, they could be in latitude and longitude, they could be in decimal degrees, which they are now, but they could also be in feet or meters, right? If you're in a projected coordinate system, your coordinates could be displaying themselves as feet away from the midpoint of wherever your projected coordinate system is in the world. And so what's happening here is when I say display XY data, this is asking me, hey, those coordinates you gave me, which we as viewers know are in decimal degrees, we're inadvertently telling us that it's feet. Right? You can see it right here. We're saying, look at those units and plot this thing at -75 and -80 feet. That's exactly what happened. If you zoom to the layer, we can see that's kind of where we are in the world, like -75 and 39. So wherever the state plane coordinate system for Pennsylvania, wherever like its midpoint or its axis or its beginning point is, we're just 75 feet west of that, and 39 feet north. Really what we want to be doing is we want to be saying, no, those units are decimal degrees. And you do it by changing this. Right, so the quickest way, if you want to just change to decimal degrees, is to pick the geographic coordinate system you're working in. Right, so we're doing NAD 1983. So I'd come in here, say United States or North America, come down and say NAD 1983. And now it has no linear unit saying those are in feet, those are in meters, those are in yards. It knows that it's decimal degrees, and I hit OK, and now everything plots where it's supposed to be. Second thing, after you do this, always good to right-click and export it, because as it exists right now, it is just a kind of like a display of those coordinates. It's not an actual shape file. And you could display it, and then it would become, its own shapefile that you can model moving forward. So the tip here is really around data management and saving. This one comes up with my students a lot. And it really has to do with you create all this data in ArcGIS, and then maybe you leave your map and you start a new map, and you can't really find anything that you've created. And so a lot of this is about discipline, but there's also some tricks to make this easier. Right, so if you just come into ArcGIS from a start, you start a totally new map, maybe I want to buffer, um, those artists where they live, and I want to buffer them at 1,000 feet. That's great, bing bada boom, do its thing, awesome, right there they are, I buffered them, and I can, zoom in and check them out. But then maybe I had deleted them by accident, or started a whole new map. And now I'm stuck in this weird thing because I'm thinking, where the heck did those go? I know I created them really quick, but I have no idea where I saved them to. You can imagine this is definitely a problem. If you've been, if you've done, tons and tons of stuff. So right off the bat, you can always go up here to geoprocessing results. And that gives you some idea of where things are. All right, I did a buffer. I did an output. What did I put in? What were my environments? That tells me essentially where it went. Right, blah, blah, blah. Any messages, where's it going right here. So you can search it and find that in the results. But more times than not, where it's actually going at a base is to something called your default geodatabase. And you usually find that some variation of documents, ArcGIS, and you should see a default something. Right, so I think what we named that was My Artists. It might not even be in this one. Maybe I have to refresh it. Right there it is, My Artist buffer. So we can actually see that occurring right here. Right? If I were to drag in My Artists, I can see it defaults right to this Mac. Home, Documents, ArcGIS, Default Geodatabase, and it simply just takes what I buffered and then puts the word buffer at the end. So I guarantee for those who have just lost track of their data, this is probably where most of it is. And there's really two ways to go about this. One is just muscle memory discipline. Just always, anytime you have a tool that has outputs, just click on that little folder, right, and give it its own name. Right? That's definitely the most important way to do things. Now it would save there. The other way to go about it is if you come up to Geoprocessing and go to Environments. Under Workspace, you can set something called the Scratch Workspace, which is essentially where things save to. So if I wanted to make this, that folder I've been using on my desktop here, CSV examples, I'll just, say October 14th Scratch, October 13th Scratch. Right, I could do that, hit OK, and now if I run the same tools, drag in My Artists, boom, it goes there. Desktop CSV examples, October 13th Scratch. So that way, even if I'm not controlling the name of it, at least I have a good idea of where things are going. Right, so, some people have already figured this out, but just a good tool for those of you who create a lot of data, but, can't really remember where it's being saved to. The tip here is more of just kind of a muscle memory correction that I think a lot of people, regardless of their skill level, fall into. So this is really more of a reminder to really build something into your mind than anything else. So the problem here is, really, let's say I have those artists again, and I'm ready to buffer them, and I'm going to go in, and I'm going to say, hey, My Artists, and they're going to buffer, and that's excellent. And, let's make it, 5,000 feet or, 2,500 feet so I can really see it. And then, okay, nothing happens. All right, so clearly I buffered and I can't see anything. This is getting ridiculous. And so I'm going to do it again. All right, probably there was an issue, and I'm going to come in, and it's 2,500. Let's go, and I'm running it, and nothing. And so I'm sure this has happened to you, probably even when you're doing field calculator sometimes too, and you're just going nuts because you keep running it and nothing is happening. Well, the issue likely is that you have something selected. So I'm hiding it from you, but if I scrolled up, I could see that I had accidentally left that little piece selected. And because I had that one artist selected, the processing would only work for that, right? So it's a super simple concept, but definitely one of those ones that I've seen people lose hours and hours and hours over, accidentally correct it, not understand why they corrected, and get into the same thing again. So again, it's just real discipline. You can control selection from the table itself, right? I could come up here and clear the selection, or I could just clear it right here. I always think unless you purposely want to select something, like unless you only did want to buffer that, never start a tool or field calculator or anything unless you're looking up and that is grayed out. Now I would run up and do the same thing, and now it would buffer for every single one of the layers. Tip is kind of like the cousin to the one that preceded it. Remember in that one, it was the issue when sometimes something is selected, maybe you can't see it, it's like out of your view, and you keep running tools or field calculator, and it doesn't seem to be doing any of the processes you're asking it to. Well, it actually was, right, but it was just only buffering that one because it was selected. So this is a similar one that may happen to you a little bit less, but it'll definitely happen once or twice in your life if you're working with raster, I find, and that's just because of some of the things that you do to help set up your raster processing. So we'll do the same thing, right? We're going to buffer the artists. We're going to do 2,500 feet. We're going to hit OK, and now we kind of have this like inverse problem where all of these ones are fine, but that one wasn't. And I can run this again and again and again, and the same thing's going to happen. And again, you might be tearing your hair out. So whenever I see something like this, usually what comes to mind is that someone has set a processing extent, which is what I did before this video to demonstrate a point. So what a processing extent really is it's just a window within which geoprocessing works. Right? So imagine this is my processing extent. If it were true, if that were a processing extent, I would be saying only do field calculator, vector, and raster-based tools to elements that are within this window. From a vector standpoint, it's a really good way to cut down on time, right? If you only have a small area, if you want to keep a huge data set intact, but you only want to process consistently in a small area without having to constantly select over and over and over again different layers, you can set it. It's also really helpful in raster because it ensures that all of your raster outputs are the exact same size, and that way if you set the cell sizes the same, they fall on top of each other perfectly like graph paper. But the problem is if something's outside of the processing window, it won't work. So really what you need to do is up here under Geoprocessing Environments, and under Processing Extent, you can see that I did in fact set it. I set it to that new shapefile. Really what you just want is default. Default is traditionally just the union of the inputs, right? So if I'm doing like a clip or something, it's just the maximum extent that would encompass all of the data that I'm using. Right? So if I hit default, and then I try to run the buffer again, now this time it will work. So come up 2,500 feet, and now everything has buffer. So the issue here is when you're trying to join two data sets together using an identical unique field, and you're almost positive you should be able to do this, but every time you try to run the join, you just can't. It just isn't giving you the option to join the two fields you want. Right, so in this instance, I have a people field, and it's got a nice ID that says join ID. And I have a DBF field that has a nice field that says join ID, and the numbers look similar, and so I'm thinking this is great, I should be able to join. But I go up and I right click people, and I go to join, and then I find DBF, and I say excellent, join ID, and then I can't get join ID. It just doesn't seem to be an option, no matter how many times you do it. And then you return and you look, and they look identical, and so you're freaking out. So the issue here is that numerical numbers can be text and numbers, but text can only be text. And what I mean by that, right, is when you create a field, they have different data types, right? So if I look at this join ID and I right-click it and go to properties, it's a long integer, right? It could be a float if it had a decimal point, or it could also be text or date. If I go over to the DBF and look at that join ID, and I right-click it, it's string, which means text. So it's alphanumeric characters. It's showing numeric characters, but it's not actually the numbers themselves. Visually, a good way to always tell is that numbers are justified to the right, and text to the left. So though these two look alike, they can't actually form a join because one's a number and one is text characters. And so the easy way around this is just simply to convert, one to the other. So your choice, as long as they're numeric characters, you can do this. Just pick one of the data sets. So let's see DBF where it is a text, and I need to convert it to an integer. So I could say join integer. Maybe I'll make it 3. And really I'll just right-click and go to Field Calculator, and I'll say just take on the values from join ID. All I'm saying is that you have a built-in mechanism, whatever value you find in join ID, as long as it is numeric, right? If one of these said A or B or C or exclamation point, this would fail. But because it sees them as numeric, it simply converts them to the appropriate number. Now I have a number and a number, and if I try to do the join now, I have join integer. I can make the join, and I can see that the data successfully joined to the table. This tip is pretty broad, but something I just really like to tell people in ArcGIS. There's a lot of muscle memory to learn here, and even if you feel like you understand the geometric or the theoretical constructs or concepts, you get the difference between raster and vector, you understand why you would use a union tool, you understand why you need to be cleaning your data, but what you're struggling with is like the muscle memory of how to actually do the many things that you want to do. Meaning all seriousness here, you should just right-click the hell out of everything in ArcGIS. And I sincerely mean this, right? I mean, you can find pathways to everything through your toolbox or through customized toolbars, but that's a lot to remember. It's super easy, however, to remember to right-click stuff. So when I right-click my data frame, right, my universe, I can add data, I can create a new group layer to group things. That's great. I can destroy my universe. I can turn layers on and off. I can look at properties that I can play with on my data frame, all kinds of fun stuff that I can model and mess with. I can click on a given layer. I can copy it. I can look at its attributes, right? I can join stuff to it. I can zoom to it. I can select it. I can edit it. I can export it. I can go to its properties and change what I can see. I can label things. I can actually color the map up in some way based on its values. Right, if I looked at my attribute table, I can right-click the fields and I can sort them. I can field calculate them. Right, I can perform some kind of statistical summary on them. I can look at their properties. I can delete them. Same thing with tables. If you right-click a table, you can open it. You can join to it. You have the option, if there's addresses, to map them. If they're XY coordinates, to plot them. Right, you can right-click on the screen. In your Arc catalog, you can right-click on folders, and it gives you the option to create new things, right? New folders, right? Blah and bloobity blabbity blue, all kinds of stuff. You can right-click on an existing folder or an existing file and model it. This even works in some instances in tools, right? If I go to a tool like Spatial Join, and maybe I'll take the neighborhoods, and I want them to tell me some information about the artists. Like this is the artist's X coordinate. I could right-click and say, hey, actually tell me the sum of all the X or Y coordinates. You wouldn't do this because this would give you a ridiculous answer, but tell me the median of all of the X values you find. Hey, for artists, Don't tell me the first artist you find. Count up the number of discrete artists that you find. So my point is, anytime you're somewhere and you're supposed to be doing something, I'm supposed to plot an XY, I'm supposed to summarize, or I'm supposed to symbolize, but you can't really remember how, just right-click the thing you want to model and the thing you want to play with, and there's a good chance you're going to get a whole universe of options worth exploring.